part 6 of Sunnah of the Prophet. We continue with the 6 major errors which all occurred because of a wrong interpretation of a verse in the book. Number 5. The 5th problem occurred because of a wrong understanding of Surat Al-hashr. Whatever the Prophet gives you, atakum, take, but whatever he forbids, nahakum, refrain from. Fear Allah, for Allah is terrible in retribution. Al-hashr, Surat Al-hashr 59 verse 7. In verse 59:7, we notice the usage of the verb ata, A-T-A, to come or to arrive, which implies that the book deliberately avoids the verb ja'a, which also means to come or to arrive. The reason for this is that the two verbs connote two different origins for what comes or arrives, whereas ata is semantically reflexive and connotes an origin that lies in the source, item, or person itself. The verb ja'a is transitive as it connotes an origin that lies outside a source, item, or person. This difference is best illustrated by verse 43 of Surat Maryam. O my Father, to me has come, ja'ani, knowledge which has not reached you, ya'tika. So follow me, I will guide you to a way that is even and straight. Surat Maryam 19 verse 43. We notice here that the text uses first ja'ani in order to indicate that Abraham, the speaker in this verse, has received divine knowledge from Allah, that is, from somewhere outside himself. Whereas in the case of his father, who has not received such knowledge, the verb ya'tika is used. Hence Abraham's command to his father to follow him. As for the verb ata in general, the verb employs it only if it refers to actions, never to speech, acts, or communication by words. If we apply these insights to 59:7, we can now explain why the verb ata, atakum, is used and not ja'a or ja'akum. Atakum refers to knowledge that Muhammad gained from human experiences, that is, from human origins, sources that lie within himself. The book deliberately avoids the term ja'akum in the phrase, so take what the apostle assigns to you, atakum, because if it had used ja'akum, it would have meant that Muhammad's human knowledge is derived from an outside divine source. Surely Allah, the highly exalted, is above what they describe to him, or at least it would give the impression that Muhammad might even be the author of the book. In sum, what the apostle assigns to you is taken from within Muhammad as a human being, while the book came down, ja'a, from outside Muhammad, both in shape and content. If we apply this more specifically to the phrase, so take what the apostle assigns to you, and link it to the question of human legislation in the form of the Sunnah of the Prophet, we must then regard Muhammad's effort to govern the 7th century Arabia society and to establish a new centralized state on the Arabian Peninsula as his effort and as contingent to his historical contents. Every human society is asked to do exactly that. Take what the apostle assigns to you to govern society and build a state according to the conditions of the present time. On a different note, we see how verse 59 verse 7 and verse 7 of Surah 59 employs the term nahiya in the phrase refrain from what he forbid you, nahakum. This usage is deliberate because it avoids the term harama. Muhammad was only required to permit or prohibit, ya'muru wa yanha, but never to absolutely allow or forbid, yahallil wa yuharrim. Since the latter is the prerogative of Allah alone, the difference is far-reaching. Whereas the area of permission or prohibition is part of human legislation and is contingent, relative, flexible, and changing, the area of absolute permission and taboo, halal or haram, is divine, fixed, absolute, and everlasting. Whereas Allah allows or forbids and permits or prohibits, a human being can only permit or prohibit, but not absolutely allow or forbid. The divine absolute taboos, al-muharramat, are sufficient for creating and sustaining the inner core and consciousness of a human being, but alone they would not be enough to run a state and govern society with all its political, economic, and social complexities. But this is exactly what Muhammad did when he created a state under the condition of life in the 7th century Arabia. In doing so, he applied what we may call the principle of tying and loosing, taqyid wa itlaq, which means that he introduced legislation and legislative bodies on the Arabian Peninsula that are aimed at either loosening the area of divine permission to give them general applicability, or tying them due to specific circumstances to make them only particularly applicable. His applications reflect the dialectical relationship between the limits that Allah has set and human legislation that maneuvers between God's boundaries. Such maneuvers, we must stress, are subject to human errors. 6. The sixth and final error was to equate obedience to Allah with obedience to Allah's apostle. First, it needs to be pointed out that the book demands obediences to Muhammad only as a messenger, Rasul, but never as a prophet, Nabi. And obey God and the apostle, Rasul, that you may obtain mercy. Surat Al-Imran 3, verse 132. This fiqh principle is based on the general linguistic distinction between the use of a word in its absolute, unqualified, mutlaq, meaning, in contrast to a specific, qualified, muqayyad, meaning. The process of qualifying the general meaning of a word is called a taqyid, while the reverse process is called al-itlaq. In Usul al-Fiqh and Usul al-Quran, al-taqyid refers to the effort of scholars to qualify an absolute general rule and apply it to specific, particular legal cases, while al-itlaq refers to the effort to generalize a rule that has been stated only for a very specific, particular situation. Further distinctions are made between al-taqyid and al-takhsis, al-nasakh, al-ta'liq, and istithna. This verse stands for many other of similar wording. The book never uses the phrase "and obey God and the Prophet." Secondly, prophet is faced with either acceptance or disapproval, and the typical response will be yes, it could be, or no, it cannot be. Whereas messengerhood is faced with either obedience or disobedience, typically expressed in yes, I assent, or no, I dissent. For example, Muhammad announced that as prophet, the verse for the convulsion of the hour of judgment will be a thing terrible, Surat Al-hashr 22, verse 1. The reaction of his listener was either yes, I think this is true, or no, this is a lie. Whereas when a messenger said, anyone who is ill or on a journey should make up for the lost days by fasting on other days later, Surat Al-Baqarah 2, verse 185, the likely response would surely not, yes, I think it's true, but either yes, I would follow that instruction, or no, I reject it. Thirdly, when Allah addresses Muhammad in the book as prophet in the manner of, "O you prophet," the instructions that follow are of general guidance, advice, or admonition issued because of a very concrete instance in the life of Muhammad. They are not meant to fall into the category of legal permissions or prohibition. In sum, the call for obedience to Muhammad is restricted to his role as messenger, not as a prophet. And his messengerhood, as we have explained earlier, consists of legal injunctions, moral rules, and ritual obligations. In order to avoid the confusion that is so common in dealing with Muhammad's Sunnah, we need to introduce two types of obedience, and that we will continue in the next part with it. Thank you for following part 6, and we would like to hear your thoughts. Part 7 from Sunnah of the Prophet will follow, and thank you.